She covered her sister's shift as a maid and met the CEO, single dad who needed her for CEO, Stories for Sleep. Before we dive in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments so we can see just how far this story reaches. And when we get to the end, I dare you to rate it from 0 to 10, because this one just might break your heart. Now, lean back, close your eyes, and enjoy the story. The storm swept over Queens as if it wanted to swallow the city whole. Rain hammered the windows, rattling the thin glass with every gust of wind. Inside a cramped apartment, a young woman sat slumped over her medical textbooks, her eyes red and heavy, but her hands still pushing through, clinging to every word on the page. Then, the phone rang, and with that sound, her future, only one exam away, suddenly hung in the balance. Laura Martinez pulled on her old raincoat, slid her sister's Maid ID into her pocket, and stepped out into the storm. From a rundown apartment in Queens, she could never have imagined that the next door she knocked on would lead her into a world unlike anything she had ever known. The mansion of a billionaire CEO, widowed, guarded, and raising a little boy who hadn't smiled since the day he lost his mother. That night, in the heart of a storm, a weary med student became a maid by accident. And without knowing it, destiny began to turn. A single choice can change an entire life. The small apartment in Queens glowed with the faint light of a single lamp. Books and notes covered the table like fallen leaves. Laura, 24, a final-year med student, sat hunched over, whispering facts under her breath. She had dreamed of wearing a white coat since she was a child. Now she was only days away. Then the phone broke the silence. On the other end, her sister Rachel's voice trembled, thin with pain. "Laura, I fell. My ankle I can't stand. The cleaning shift tonight in Westchester. Please, can you cover for me? If I cancel, I'll lose the job." Laura froze. On one side lay her future. On the other, her sister, the one who had carried the weight of the family for years. She looked at the unfinished books spread before her, then at her calloused hands, and let out a slow, heavy breath. Just one night, she told herself. And so, in the thick of a storm, Laura put on her sister's uniform and clipped the name tag to her chest. She had no way of knowing that walking out of that shabby apartment would lead her straight into a mansion of cold marble and lonely halls, where a billionaire CEO lived in silence with a child who had forgotten how to laugh. One small decision, and her whole life would change. Part 1. An unexpected sacrifice. The apartment in Queens was so small that every step echoed against the faded tile floor. The faint smell of cold instant noodles lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of ink and paper from the tower of medical textbooks stacked halfway up the table. Laura Martinez sat cross-legged on the floor, her dark-rimmed eyes glowing faintly under the weak yellow lamp. She read the same line of clinical diagnosis again and again, her highlighter dragging across the page, but the words refused to stay still. They twisted, blurred, and danced before her exhausted gaze. Outside, rain hammered against the tin roof like 1,000 fists. The wind howled through the cracks in the old window, rattling the rag her sister had stuffed there to keep out the draft. In the bitter chill, Laura pulled her hoodie tight, her hands trembling as she flipped another page. Tomorrow's clinical exam was the threshold, her one chance to move from poverty into the hospital internship of her dreams. If she passed, everything could change. Then the phone buzzed hard against the tile floor. Laura jumped, her heart racing. The name on the screen read, Rachel. She answered instantly. Rachel, why are you calling so late? On the other end, her sister's voice quivered, tangled with ragged breaths. Laura, I fell. My ankle, I can't stand on it. Laura shot up, panic rising. What, are you hurt badly? Do I need to call an ambulance? No. It's not that bad. But I have a shift tonight. A new client. Westchester. If I cancel, they'll cut the contract. Laura clutched the phone tighter. The wind screamed outside, echoing the storm building inside her chest. Rachel, my exam is tomorrow. I can't, just please. Rachel's voice cracked, heavy with tears. Just this once. They've never met me. They don't know my face. Wear the uniform, take the badge. It's just dusting, tidying up a few rooms. One night, please. Silence filled the tiny apartment. Laura's eyes swept across the room. 2 backpacks hanging by the door. A broken bookshelf propped against the wall. A pair of sneakers, worn down at the heels. Every corner whispered the truth. Her sister had worked herself raw, cleaning rich people's homes, just so Laura could afford school. And even now, lying in pain, Rachel's only fear was losing a client. Laura pressed her hand to her forehead, tears brimming. On one side lay her white coat dream, so close she could almost touch it. On the other, her only sister. Her whisper was barely audible, more to herself than to the phone. Okay, I'll go. In that moment, the storm outside seemed to pause. The room went still. Laura's heart twisted, but her eyes shone with a quiet resolve. No exam, no future could measure the weight of sisterhood. She stood, each step heavy, as if she were walking with lead in her shoes. In the cramped bathroom, flickering fluorescent light glared against the cracked mirror. On the wall hung a gray maid's uniform, Rachel's. Freshly pressed seams, fraying fabric thinned by years of washing, but spotless. Above the chest pocket dangled a small plastic badge, R. Martinez. Laura reached out her fingers, brushing the badge. Her throat tightened. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the bright-eyed med student anymore. It was someone preparing to step into another life. She shed her hoodie and scrubs, leaving them in a heap on the floor. Her bare skin felt fragile in the cold air. When she slid into Rachel's uniform, it swallowed her small frame, its weight settling like a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. Clipping the badge to her chest, Laura whispered bitterly at her reflection. Tonight, Laura doesn't exist. Only Rachel. A gust of wind rattled the window, scattering her open notes across the wet tile. Words about symptoms, diagnosis, treatment blurred into black smudges. Tomorrow's exam felt suddenly distant, almost irrelevant. From the bedroom came her sister's weak voice, muffled but tender. Thank you, Laura. Laura gripped the edge of the sink, swallowing back tears. Then she straightened her spine, inhaled deeply, as if scrubbing in for surgery, except this time she wasn't saving a patient. She was saving her sister's livelihood. She tied her hair back in a ponytail, splashed cold water on her face, and whispered one last time at the mirror one night. Then I'll be myself again. But deep inside, she already knew sometimes a single choice on a stormy night can change the course of an entire life. The warped wooden door creaked shut behind her, and the rain swallowed her whole. Her umbrella snapped inside out, useless against the wind. Rain slid down her neck, soaking her collar. The alleyway outside their apartment was dim, lit only by a pale window glow from the second floor. Clutching Rachel's cleaning kit, Laura hurried through puddles that mirrored the street lamps like broken glass. The subway was crowded with damp, tired faces, strangers who averted their eyes. Laura sank into a corner seat, clutching the bag to her chest, as though letting go would make everything vanish. She thought of Rachel, ankle-bound, still worrying about losing a job. The ache in her chest deepened. "I'll do this for you, sis," she promised silently. The train rattled to its final stop. On the platform, wind cut through her soaked clothes. She flagged down an old taxi. The driver gave her a glance, a mixture of pity and curiosity, before pulling away into the rain. As the city blocks slipped past, Queens fell away. Crumbling buildings gave way to cobbled lanes, tall trees, and finally rows of pristine mansions. White walls, black roofs, a world she had only seen in glossy magazines. Laura pressed her forehead to the cold glass, her heart thundering. She felt like an intruder, slipping into another universe, one where billionaire CEOs lived in silence and marble halls. The cab turned onto a long, winding drive. 2 rows of trees lined the path leading to a massive house looming in the storm. Lights glowed faintly behind tall windows. Rain lashed against stone walls, making the mansion look less like a home, more like a fortress. The taxi rolled to a stop. Laura sat frozen, clutching the strap of her bag, so hard, her knuckles turned white. "What am I doing?" her mind whispered. But then Rachel's voice echoed in her memory, fragile but pleading. Laura inhaled sharply, stepped out into the downpour, and faced the towering front door. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her small figure in a gray uniform, trembling yet unyielding. The stone steps gleamed with rain as she climbed, every heartbeat pounding in her chest. At the door, her hand hesitated, shaking. "It's just cleaning." Just one night, she told herself, but the lie felt paper thin against the storm. Before she could knock, the heavy door creaked open. A tall figure filled the doorway. In the warm light behind him, his sharp jaw and dark hair streaked with silver were unmistakable. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, collar undone, as if weariness had replaced formality. His eyes, deep shadowed, looked through her with unnerving precision. David Whitmore. The name she had seen in business headlines, CEO of Whitmore Holdings. But here, in the doorway of his mansion, he wasn't just a tycoon. He was a man carved by grief, cloaked in silence. His gaze dropped to the uniform, to the badge gleaming on her chest, R. Martinez. "You're late," he said, voice low and unyielding. Laura's pulse hammered. She lowered her eyes, murmuring, "I'm sorry." The storm. Only the ground floor, he interrupted coldly. "The living room, the library. Don't go upstairs. No greeting, no warmth, only an order." He stepped aside and let her pass. Inside, Laura froze. The chandelier spilled golden light across marble floors. Oil paintings lined the walls, bookshelves heavy with leather tomes. It was dazzling, and yet lifeless. No flowers, no music, only the hollow tick of a clock. Laura clutched her bag, whispering to herself, "Just clean, then leave." At the far end of the hall, David lingered, watching. His eyes were unreadable, but she could feel them cutting through her. He wasn't simply guarding a house. He was guarding a fortress built around his heart. She unpacked her cloth and cleaner, forcing her hands not to shake. Behind her, his footsteps receded slow and deliberate until the study door closed. Only the storm and the clock remained. And then softly, like a whisper, another sound. Laura looked up. In the doorway stood a little boy, no older than 4, hair chestnut brown falling into his eyes. A stuffed elephant clutched tight to his chest. His gray eyes were wide-shadowed by a sorrow far too heavy for his age. Laura froze. She hadn't expected anyone else, least of all a child. The boy said nothing. He only studied her curious, cautious silence. Her throat went dry. "Hi there," she whispered. No answer. Only those solemn eyes. Slowly, Laura slipped a napkin from her pocket, folded it with trembling fingers into a paper plane. Holding it out, she murmured, "Want to see something magical?" The boy didn't move, but his lashes fluttered just slightly. It was enough. Laura flicked the paper plane. It wobbled, glided, and landed by his feet. And in that fragile instant, magic happened. The boy bent down, picked it up, and smiled. Faint, fleeting, but real. His first smile in a very long time. Laura's breath caught. Tears stung her eyes. She knew without question this wasn't just a smile. It was a crack of light breaking through years of silence. Behind them, footsteps returned. David appeared, his tall frame filling the hall. His gaze fell on his son Theo, and the small miraculous smile on the boy's face. For the first time, his cold eyes shifted. Something flickered shocked disbelief. He looked at Laura, and though no words passed between them, she saw it in his face. He had just witnessed the impossible. Laura blinked back her tears. In that moment, she realized her sacrifice wasn't just about her sister anymore. This night had placed her in the path of 2 souls lost in their own silence, a broken CEO and a little boy who hadn't smiled until now. Part 2. The Cold CEO. The door of the Westchester mansion cracked open, spilling warm golden light into the rain-soaked night. Laura stood frozen on the stone steps, her uniform clinging to her skin, her hand still gripping the strap of her cleaning bag as if it were a lifeline. The man who appeared in the doorway towered over her, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor. He didn't look like the CEOs Laura had glimpsed in glossy magazines. No tailored suit, no polished smile. His white shirt was wrinkled collar, undone sleeves rolled to the elbow veins running sharply down his forearms. And yet, the simplicity only made him radiate an undeniable authority. His eyes swept over her wet hair, plastered to her cheeks, skin flushed from the cold, the gray uniform soaked through. Finally, his voice broke the silence. Low, sharp, icy. "You're late." Just 2 words yet. Laura's chest tightened as though she had been struck. No greeting, no kindness, only fact. She ducked her head, whispering, "I'm sorry." The storm? The train David Whitmore said nothing. His dark gaze stayed fixed, colder than the storm behind her. Then stepping aside, he gave a single order, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Only the ground floor, the living room, the library. Don't go upstairs. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her inside a world that didn't belong to her. Laura took a breath, looking up, and gasped. The marble gleamed beneath her feet, reflecting her small figure back at her. Above a crystal chandelier, glowed like frozen raindrops suspended in air. It was breathtaking, and yet lifeless, like beauty carved for silence, not for living. She adjusted the badge pinned to her chest, R. Martinez, and swallowed hard. One night. Just one night, she told herself. But when her eyes drifted toward David, leaning casually against a marble pillar with his arms crossed, it felt less like a shift and more like signing an unspoken contract she hadn't read. "Been with Everclean long?" he asked suddenly, his tone calm but testing. Laura's stomach dropped. She clutched her bag tighter, avoiding his gaze. A while she replied quickly, not a lie, but not the truth either. Her pulse hammered. David studied her in silence, his eyes lingering as though he could read every word she had left unsaid. And then, almost casually, he turned away. "Don't bother my son?" Laura flinched. He hadn't said, "Don't bother me." He'd said, "my son." In that instant, she understood his entire world had narrowed down to one child, and the doors of his heart had been locked long ago. The mansion seemed to grow colder. As Laura set her cleaning kit on the mahogany table, she realized his eyes were still on her, even when his footsteps faded, even when he disappeared down the hall. A man like David Whitmore didn't let anyone wander his home without watching. The echo of her cloth on polished wood filled the silence. She worked with painstaking care, wiping each surface until it gleamed as though her future depended on every circle her hand made. But the more she cleaned, the more she noticed what wasn't there. No flowers, no family photos, no trace of laughter. The walls held priceless art, but no warmth. The house wasn't a home, it was a vault for grief. Footsteps again, heavy, deliberate. Laura lifted her head, and there he was. David stood in the doorway, arms folded his face, hard lines under the amber light. His gaze pinned her like a judge in a silent trial. She dropped her eyes and continued wiping, though her pulse raced. Then his voice cut through quiet, but heavy enough to press the air from her chest. "Where do you live?" She froze, then whispered, "Queens, with my sister." A slow nod. Then, "How long have you been doing this?" Her throat tightened. "Long enough," she said firmly, though guilt laced every syllable. He didn't call her out. He didn't press. He only stood there, as if he had long grown accustomed to lies told in front of him. And that calm acceptance weighed heavier than suspicion. Her rag slipped from her hand, falling to the marble with a startling thud. She bent to grab it, but when she rose, David's eyes were locked on hers. For a moment, she felt he could see straight through the false name on her chest, straight through the uniform, straight into the secret she carried. His next words were soft, but laced with steel. "Don't break anything. Nothing here can be replaced." The chill in his voice made her shiver. She nodded quickly, clutching the rag until her knuckles turned white. This man has lost something, she realized, something no fortune could restore. Later drawn down a long, echoing corridor, Laura pushed open a heavy door and found herself inside the library. Towering walnut shelves stretched to the ceiling, dust clinging to leather spines. The air smelled of paper and time. For a moment, she forgot she was only a maid in disguise. She traced a spine Medical Ethics 1985, and her heart clenched. How cruel she thought that books here sat untouched, while she and her sister had once shared a single borrowed textbook under a flickering lamp. A sound behind her. David stood at the threshold, his shadow swallowing the light. His eyes burned sharper than before. "I told you," his voice cracked like a gavel, "not to go upstairs. I just thought I should dust a little." He strode forward, each step heavy with a weight she couldn't name. Up close, she saw the fine lines etched into his face, the wear of sleepless years. His gaze swept the room, and his voice dropped thick with something unspoken. This isn't a place for dusting. This is a place no one wants to walk into anymore. Laura's heart stuttered. On the desk lay a frame turned face down, layered in dust. A pull stronger than reason guided her hand. She brushed it clean, flipped it over, and gasped. A young woman smiled in the photo, cradling a newborn. Her eyes shone bright, familiar eyes she had already seen in Theo. David stiffened. His hand twitched as if to snatch it away, but froze in midair. For the first time, his face cracked, grief bleeding through. His voice rasped, broken, "Don't touch it." Laura quickly set the frame down. "I'm sorry." The room fell silent, their breaths filling the emptiness. In that silence, Laura understood wealth hadn't healed him. It had only magnified the echo of loss. And beneath his coldness lay a wound that had never closed. The grandfather clock struck 8, its chime reverberating through the mansion. Laura was packing up when his voice came again from the dining room. "Dinner." She froze. Did he just invite me? In the long dining hall, the grand table stretched endlessly, but tonight it bore only 3 simple plates, spaghetti salad, and toasted bread. David sat at the head sleeves rolled tie discarded. Not a CEO now, but a weary man holding his household together for his son. And beside him, little Theo sat in a booster seat, clutching his tattered stuffed elephant. The boy's gray eyes lifted and brightened when they found Laura. His small hand waved her toward the empty chair. I shouldn't," Laura stammered, clutching her bag. "I'm just here to clean. I don't want to intrude." David's eyes met hers steady. "The cook's off." "I cooked. He wants you here, so you sit." It was command, not request. Yet the words that lingered were softer than he meant. "He wants you here." Laura sat. At first, silence hung heavy, broken only by the clink of forks. Then a small voice, almost a whisper. "You eat too slow." Laura blinked. Her heart leapt. It was Theo. She smiled, her voice gentle. "Do I? Then I'll try to eat faster." Theo grinned, a mischievous glint flashing in his eyes. David froze fork in midair. For so long, his son had not spoken freely to anyone. And now, Laura laughed softly, and the boy's smile widened. David's chest tightened. He had forgotten what this sound, this light felt like. Later, when Laura tucked Theo into his room, the boy clutched his elephant and the paper airplane she had folded earlier, laying it carefully on the nightstand like a treasure. "Read me a story," he whispered. Laura glanced toward the door. David stood there leaning against the frame, weary but watchful. His voice was low. "If he wants it, one story." Her heart warmed. She opened the worn picture book, her voice soft as a lullaby. The little bear turned and turned, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the wind whispered. The moon hung high. Theo's breathing slowed. His tiny hand found hers beneath the blanket. The room glowed with a fragile peace. When she finished, Laura looked up. David was still there. His gaze rested on his son, asleep with a smile, and in that moment, his face wasn't the mask of a CEO. It was a father undone by the sight of his child at peace. His eyes shifted to her. For a heartbeat, the ice melted, revealing something raw and unspoken. His voice was rough, broken down to 2 words. "Thank you." Laura swallowed hard, nodding. Her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. And when she left the room, David remained in the doorway, silent, unmoving. Only his eyes followed her until she was gone. Somewhere inside him, something had stirred. Fragile, unexpected, alive again after far too long. Part 3. The First Smile. The next afternoon, the Whitmore mansion lay bathed in the pale gold-gray light of a sky washed clean by rain. The tall glass windows caught the chill of that light, spilling it across the marble floors until the whole house seemed glazed in frost. The living room was immaculate sofas, perfectly arranged, the ebony table free of dust, every surface flawless. And yet, something essential was missing, something that might make it feel like a home. Laura set down her cleaning bag and began to work. The sound of cloth against polished wood echoed softly, steady as a heartbeat, though her own pulse was far less calm. She could not forget the flicker she'd seen in David's eyes the night before, when he had stood in the doorway, watching his son sleep to the sound of her voice. A fleeting fracture in his coldness, a thin thread that seemed to connect them for one breath before vanishing again behind walls of ice. A sound broke the silence. Tap, tap. Laura looked up. At the end of the hall stood Theo, dressed in a pale blue sweater, clutching his worn stuffed elephant. His solemn gray eyes held far more weight than any child should. He did not move closer. He simply stood there, like a small sentinel guarding invisible gates. Laura softened her voice, offering a smile. "Hi there. We meet again." Theo said nothing. His lashes fluttered once, a flicker of acknowledgement. The house fell still again, so quiet she could hear the wind pressing against the windows. Her fingers brushed her pocket. Inside was a folded napkin left over from her bag. The thought came sudden daring. She pulled out a chair, sat low, so she was at his eye level, and began to fold. Each crease was careful, deliberate, her hands trembling slightly with the effort of gentleness. Theo tilted his head, gaze caught on the shape slowly forming in her hands. Laura lifted her eyes to his, whispering, "Want to see something magical?" No reply, but a faint shimmer lit in his eyes. Laura exhaled, flicked her fingers, and sent the paper plane into the air. It wobbled, dipped, then landed at his feet. And in that instant, Theo bent down, picked it up. His small hand shook slightly as he held it. Then, the corners of his lips curved. A smile, small, fragile, but radiant enough to shatter the night that had cloaked this house for so long. Laura froze, her heart clenched so tight it hurt. She had not expected such a simple gesture to hold such power. At the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. David, arms folded, silent, his eyes locked on his son. For once, those eyes trembled. He didn't look at Laura, he couldn't. All he saw was his child's smile, the first since the darkness had fallen over their lives. Laura's throat burned, her eyes stung, but she blinked hard, swallowing it down. Children were sensitive. If she cried, Theo might retreat again. So she smiled instead, soft as moonlight. "Try throwing it. Airplanes only have magic when they fly." Theo hesitated, then raised his hand and tossed. The plane stumbled through the air, landing crooked on the rug. Not perfect, but the sound that followed, a small, shy giggle, was perfect beyond measure. Laura's chest ached. She whispered, "Bravo, little pilot." Theo laughed again, brighter this time, scampering to throw it once more. The plane flew farther, sliding beneath the sofa. His hands clapped in triumph, his gray eyes glowing with joy. The ice was cracking. The once sterile living room filled with the rhythm of small footsteps, with laughter spilling between the walls, mingling with the rain outside. At the doorway, David stood, motionless. Arms still crossed, but his eyes betrayed him. From the night his wife had passed, he had forgotten this sound, forgotten what his son's laughter felt like. And now, a flimsy paper plane had restored it. His jaw tightened. He neither stepped in nor turned away. He only watched, and deep in his chest, something long buried stirred. Laura looked up and met his gaze. Heat rushed through her, startled, and she quickly bent back toward Theo, though her lips could not help curving into a quiet smile. For the first time, the gulf between billionaire and student wasn't measured in wealth, but in a child's laughter, simple, priceless, shared. The little plane grew frayed from so much flying. Laura chuckled, rolled up her sleeves, and dropped to the rug beside Theo. A true pilot needs more than one plane. Shall we build a whole fleet? Theo's eyes lit, his head bobbing eagerly. He folded his small hands neatly on his knees, watching each movement as she crafted 2 more planes from the scraps of notes she carried. One pure white, one streaked faintly with ink stains from her study pages. "This one's yours," she said, placing it in his hands. Then lifting the other, she smiled. "And this one is mine." Theo's smile widened bright and toothy this time, and Laura's heart nearly stumbled. She had given him something no one else had managed for years. A soft sound drifted from the doorway, a cough. David stood leaning against the frame, one hand in his pocket. His eyes were fixed on his son, unblinking. Theo turned, hesitated, then lifted his small plane toward him. "Daddy, want to fly?" The words were halting, fragile, but they were an invitation. Something David hadn't heard in far too long. He froze. For a moment, even his breath stilled. Then slowly, he stepped inside. His large hand reached for the paper plane, impossibly delicate in his grasp. And in that moment, the space between father and son closed. Laura held her breath as David crouched, adjusted the folds with surprising care, then launched it forward. It soared straight, gliding the length of the rug before coming to rest on the table leg. Theo laughed pure, ringing laughter, bright as a bell. The sound echoed across the vast, cold room, chasing away shadows that had lingered for years. Laura's eyes blurred. She whispered, barely audible, "Do you hear that this house just found its laughter again?" David's gaze flicked toward her, meeting hers for the briefest second. Something shifted, strange, raw, almost grateful. In that moment, the 3 of them sat on the rug together, a paper fleet between them. And for a fleeting heartbeat, they looked like a family. When Theo scampered off to fetch his plane again, Laura reached for it at the same time David did. Their hands touched just for a second. His skin was warm, his grip, strong veins standing out against his wrist. A shock traveled through her, sharp and unexpected. She glanced up and found his eyes, waiting dark, but softened, carrying something she couldn't name. The room shrank. The mansion, the chandeliers, the marble, all of it fell away. Only his eyes and the echo of his hand against hers remained. She pulled back quickly, cheeks burning. "Sorry, I didn't." David turned the plane in his hand, voice low, husky, almost to himself. Strange how a scrap of paper can make him smile again. Laura's throat tightened. She knew he wasn't speaking to her. He was speaking to himself, to the father who had been powerless to bring back that smile. It wasn't an accident. It was the tremor of a heart remembering how to beat. Theo's cheerful cry broke the moment. "Daddy, Miss Laura, Look, mine flew the farthest. David straightened, slipping the mask of composure back over his face. But Laura had seen the crack. She had felt it. Later, as she packed her bag and buttoned her coat, Theo ran barefoot across the cold tiles, clutching his elephant. "Miss Laura," he whispered. She bent down, fixing his collar, smiling softly. "Sleep well, little pilot. Planes need dreams if they want to fly farther." He threw his small arms around her, a quick, fierce hug, enough to make her heart stumble. She whispered into his hair, "Thank you for smiling today. Your smile is worth more than everything." At the hall's edge, David stood silently watching. He didn't step in. He didn't stop it. He only looked on something unreadable in his eyes. Laura pulled away, nodded politely as David opened the front door. "Good night, sir," she murmured, voice trembling. He didn't answer. He stood framed in the golden light, a shadow stretching long across the wet stone. She walked away, the door closing softly behind her. But the house no longer sounded hollow. The laughter still clung to its walls, echoing in corners, long barren. David sank into the sofa, his hand pressed flat to the polished wood. For 2 years, silence and sorrow had ruled these rooms. And tonight, because of a girl with folded paper, they had been broken. He leaned back, eyes closing, letting the echo of his son's laughter linger. And for the first time in years, the mansion felt less like a museum and more like a home. Part 4. A simple dinner. The grandfather clock in the great hall struck 7, each heavy chime echoing through the cold stone walls. Laura had just finished wiping down the living room when a deep, husky voice carried from the kitchen dinner. She froze, certain she'd misheard. A billionaire like David Whitmore inviting a maid to eat. But the voice came again, firmer this time, like a command, "Come." Hesitantly, Laura stepped into the dining room. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the long walnut table built to seat 20. Yet tonight, only 3 simple settings waited: spaghetti steaming in white bowls, a small salad, and slices of toasted bread. David sat at the head of the table. His shirt was unbuttoned, at the collar sleeves rolled. His shoulders slouched with fatigue. No longer the image of a CEO gracing the pages of financial magazines, just a man worn from a long day. Beside him, Theo sat in his booster seat, stuffed elephant tucked neatly beside his plate. The boy looked up at Laura, gray eyes brightening, and raised a tiny hand beckoning her closer. I'm only here to clean." "I shouldn't," Laura began, flustered. David's gaze lifted, cutting into hers. His voice was low, steady, unyielding. "He wants you here. So you sit." There was no room for refusal. Laura drew in a breath and lowered herself into the chair across from Theo. Her back straightened, her pulse racing as if she were sitting for an interview far more important than any exam. Silence lingered at first. Only the faint clink of forks against china. Then Theo tilted his head, watching her intently, and spoke softly, shyly. "You eat too slow." Laura's eyes widened. Across the table, David's fork halted in midair. For months, his son had not spoken to anyone unfamiliar, yet here he was, teasing a stranger. A gentle laugh escaped Laura. "Then next time, I'll eat faster so my little pilot won't have to wait." Theo's gray eyes lit, and a laugh bubbled up, pure and bright, filling the cavernous room. David sat frozen, his hand tightening around his fork. He hadn't heard that sound, his son's laughter at the dinner table, in years. It pierced through his armor, like sunlight breaking ice, leaving his gaze unsteady. Laura sat quietly, her heart swelling. This was more than a meal. This was a small miracle turning a mansion back into a home. The scent of buttered bread and sweet tomato sauce drifted warmly through the room. Laura twisted her napkin nervously in her lap, while David ate in silence, his eyes flicking to his son, again and again, as if still adjusting to the presence of someone new at their table. Theo twirled his fork, ate a few strands of spaghetti, then suddenly lifted his face. His voice trembled with a question that struck like lightning. "Miss Laura, did my mommy eat spaghetti too?" The air froze. David's fork clinked softly against his plate, his shoulders locking. No one had dared speak that word mommy in this house for 2 years. Laura's chest tightened. She glanced at Theo's hopeful eyes, then at David's darkened face, his gaze dropping like a shutter. One wrong word, and the fragile laughter would vanish back into silence. She drew in a careful breath, then smiled gently. I think she must have. Because who wouldn't love spaghetti this good? Theo blinked, then nodded, as if that small reassurance filled the gap in his fading memory. He lowered his head again, still smiling faintly as he ate. Laura exhaled relief washing over her. But David sat unmoving, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed downward. Wealth power, none of it could save a man from the loss that sealed his heart. Theo broke the silence again, eager. At school today, I drew a plane. The teacher put it on the board, right next to Josh's son. But mine flew straight up into the sky. It didn't fall like Josh's. His small hands lifted mimicking wings. His voice shone with pride. Laura chuckled softly, cheeks glowing. Then you were born to be a pilot. Theo giggled, laughter spilling across the table. At the head, David finally lifted his eyes. He looked at his son, eyes bright face glowing with joy, then at Laura, smiling tenderly at the boy. Something cracked, almost imperceptible, at the corner of his mouth. And then, a sound. Low, rough, brief. A laugh. Laura's heart skipped. She had never imagined hearing it from him, the man carved from stone. "Daddy, you laughed," Theo exclaimed, eyes shining. David stilled, caught as though exposed. But when he saw his son's delight, his shoulders eased. He gave the smallest nod, voice gruff. Your plane was very good." For the first time in years, two sounds echoed in that dining room, the laughter of a child and the laugh of a father. Laura bent her head, biting her lip to hold back tears. Sometimes a single laugh is enough to begin a new life. By the time dinner ended, Theo was slumped in his chair, belly-full stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, and the paper plane Laura had folded the day before clutched tightly in the other. Laura stood gathering dishes out of habit. The clink of silverware sounded foreign in such a silent house. "Leave them," David's voice called from the head of the table. She paused. "I'm used to it. At home, my sister and I do everything ourselves." David said nothing, only watched. For once, he didn't stop her. He sat still, observing as she rinsed plates, dried fragile crystal glasses with practiced care, moving naturally in a kitchen that should have been alien to her. When a silver spoon slipped from her hand, clattering against the tile, Laura startled, bending to retrieve it, just as another hand reached down. David's. Their fingers brushed. She froze, breath caught, and lifted her gaze. His eyes met hers, no longer. Blades of ice? but something rawer, surprise, conflict, and ache too deep to name. She pulled back quickly, whispering, "Sorry. I wasn't careful." David didn't answer. He set the spoon aside, then stepped to the sink beside her. He turned on the water, began rinsing another plate. Laura blinked, stunned. A man who dealt in millions standing shoulder to shoulder with her washing dishes in silence. Two people, from opposite worlds, their hands immersed in the same warm water. And for a fleeting moment, the divide between wealth and poverty, employer and maid, seemed to dissolve. Later, as she lifted Theo into her arms, the boy's head sank against her shoulder, heavy with sleep. His small voice murmured, barely audible, "Miss Laura, don't go." David stopped in his tracks behind her. He didn't speak, but the words hung in the air, hitting something deep within him. In Theo's room, Laura laid the boy gently down, pulling the blanket to his chin. His little fingers clung to her hand, eyes half closed. "One more story," he mumbled. She smiled softly, opening a book from the low shelf. Her voice was gentle as a lullaby. Once upon a time, there was a little bear who couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned until he discovered that when someone sat beside him, listening to his breath, he finally felt safe. Theo's lips curved faintly as he drifted off the stuffed elephant slipping from his grasp. Peace filled the room like a tide. The door creaked. Laura looked up. David stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. His face in the lamplight was no longer ice. It was softened, weary, almost vulnerable. Laura rose quietly, stepping past him. His voice followed, low and rough. "Thank you." 2 words, heavy as stone. Not to her, but to the universe. For a moment he thought he had lost forever. Laura bowed her head, unable to speak. He didn't look at her. His eyes fixed only on his son, sleeping with a smile. For the first time in years, David Whitmore realized he wasn't entirely alone. That night, the Whitmore mansion did not feel like a cold monument of wealth. In the soft glow of a nightlight, it carried the faint shape of something else. A family. Fragile, imperfect, but achingly warm. Part 5. The warm days. Days slipped by like a quiet river, and yet inside the Whitmore mansion, the smallest details began to change. Laura now came every afternoon after classes. She wasn't just cleaning anymore, she was spending time with Theo. The little boy, once so silent now, ran through the long hallways with his paper airplane clutched in hand, his laughter echoing faintly behind him. One evening after a simple dinner, Theo clutched Laura's hand, his voice tiny. "Miss Laura, I'm scared at night. The walls, they're too dark." Laura's chest tightened at the tremor in his gray eyes. His room, painted pale blue, seemed cheerful by day. But at night, it was barren, shadowed, lonely. She sat on the edge of his bed, thought for a moment, then pulled a bundle of colored notepaper from her bag, the same sheets she scribbled medical formulas on. Tonight, they became something else. "Shall we make our own sky?" she whispered with a smile. Theo's eyes widened with wonder as she cut the paper into stars, crescent moons, even a few shooting comets. One by one, she taped them to the walls. With each star, she murmured softly, "This is Orion, the great hunter. He'll guard you while you sleep. And this is Lyra the harp. They say whenever this star shines, it means your mommy is sending you a lullaby from heaven." Theo's hand gripped her sleeve, his voice trembling. "Mommy, is she up there?" Laura swallowed the lump in her throat, steadying her voice. "Yes, she's always there. Whenever you look up, she'll send you her light." In that moment, the room glowed, not from the paper stars, but from the fragile faith rekindled in a little boy's heart. David stood in the doorway, a glass of untouched wine in his hand. He didn't step in. He only watched his son, staring up at the handmade constellations, the young woman carefully piecing together a sky out of scraps. Grief rose in him sharp and familiar, but so too did warmth seeping into a place he thought no longer existed. The room that had once drowned in shadows now shimmered with its own sky. And beneath it, a child who had lost his mother found comfort enough to smile as his eyes closed. Laura sat beside his bed, her voice flowing like a gentle breeze. Once upon a time, there was a little pilot who flew among the stars to find his smile again. Theo chuckled drowsily, his laughter trailing into sleep. And in the hall, David turned away quickly, hiding the glimmer that had welled at the corner of his eye. The days that followed reshaped the rhythm of the house. No longer a mausoleum of silence, it carried ordinary sounds, strange and yet precious. The boil of water in a pot, the sizzle of butter in a pan, a boy's giggle echoing from the kitchen. Laura often arrived still in her plain gray uniform. She would peek into the refrigerator and conjure the simplest meals: grilled cheese, chicken, noodle soup, oatmeal with bits of fruit. Theo would dart around the kitchen elephant in one hand, chattering endlessly. "Miss Laura, today I drew the biggest sun in class. My teacher said I can read the word moon better than anyone." Laura stirred the pot with a wooden spoon, smiling as she nodded. "My little pilot is painting the whole sky already." His cheeks lit up with every word of praise. Many evenings, David returned home early. He would stand silently at the doorway, his suit jacket folded over one arm, watching. The scene was always the same: a young woman with sleeves, rolled hair falling loose across her face, stirring soup. A small boy perched on a stool, eyes shining, waiting eagerly. For a long time, David never walked in right away. He only leaned against the frame, listening to what family once sounded like. That night's dinner was nothing more than soup and toasted bread. But Theo ate with joy, words spilling between bites, Laura laughing softly in reply. At the head of the table, David spooned his own serving, slowly, his shoulders easing. Under the soft glow of the chandelier, the lines of his face seemed gentler, as though thawed. This was no longer the house of a wealthy man. It was beginning to sound like a home. One rainy afternoon, Theo pulled Laura into the living room, arms full of pillows. "Miss Laura, come on, we're building a castle." He stacked cushions, high-draped blankets, like banners, his elephant crowned atop the tallest tower. Laura laughed, kneeling to help. "Then every castle needs a fortress wall. Are you ready for a battle, little prince?" Theo nodded vigorously, cheeks flushed. Together, they transformed the pristine living room into a fortress of chaos. David arrived home to find the scene. His shirt was damp from rain, his tie loose. He stopped at the doorway, stunned the marble floors littered with pillows, his son laughing wildly, Laura's hair falling loose as she steadied a blanket roof. "Daddy," Theo shouted, beaming, "come join. Come inside my castle." For a moment, David froze. He had lived in a house where not a single cushion was ever out of place. And now it was a mess, a glorious living mess. Laura glanced up, their eyes locking. Her voice was playful, but gentle. "We need a night. Would you accept the invitation?" Mr. Whitmore, silence. Then David exhaled, tugged off his tie, and stepped forward. Theo squealed. Now we have a king, a fairy, and a knight. Laura bit back a smile. Under the golden light, she saw something she never thought she would. A powerful CEO crouched on the carpet shoulder, brushing hers, indulging his son's imagination. The mansion that had once been a tomb of silence now rang with laughter. And in that moment, David laughed too. Not the polite chuckle of a businessman, but a deep, unguarded laugh. Laura's breath caught. Her heart stumbled. She had never imagined this man could sound so alive. She looked at him, and he looked back. For a heartbeat, their laughter collided, and the ice between them cracked further. Later that night, Theo fell asleep beneath the paper stars Laura had hung. He clutched his elephant, his lips curving faintly as though dreaming. Laura stroked his hair, whispering, "Your mommy's star is singing to you now. Close your eyes and you'll hear it." The boy's breathing deep and steady and peaceful. David stood just beyond the doorframe, his silhouette heavy against the dim light. His eyes were fixed on his son, and then on her. The woman sitting quietly, her presence filling the room with something he hadn't dared to hope for again. "Thank you," he whispered, too low for anyone but himself to hear. For the first time in years, the mansion breathed again. It lived. It loved. And it all began with paper stars, a bowl of soup, and a lopsided pancake shaped like a heart. Part 6. David. Begins to change night fell quietly. The rain from the evening before had left behind a chill that seeped through the tall window panes. In the carpeted hallway, David's footsteps made no sound as he stopped before his son's door left slightly ajar. Soft light spilled out from the star-shaped night lamp. Inside, a gentle voice floated like a lullaby. And the little bear realized that as long as one star was watching, the dark was no longer so frightening. Laura's voice. David stood frozen, one hand pressed against the doorframe. He leaned, listening. On the bed, Theo lay nestled in Laura's arms, eyes half-closed, lips curved in a faint smile. His stuffed elephant was tucked under his chin, while the blue walls shimmered with paper stars. Something inside David clenched. His heart, so long accustomed to beating only for boardrooms and contracts, trembled at this simple, ordinary miracle, his son smiling in his sleep. How many years had it been since he last saw that smile at night? Since his wife's death, Theo had known only tears, silence, and fear of the dark. And now, because of this young woman, he could finally rest with a smile. Laura pulled the blanket higher, her slender hand smoothing Theo's hair with tender care. She didn't know David was standing there, but to him, it looked as though she held the whole world for his son inside that small embrace. His throat tightened. He whispered inside himself, "God, how many years have I wasted letting my child endure this?" For a man who once believed money could mend anything, the truth pressed down on him. Real happiness was contained in something as fragile as a child's laughter when he feels loved. He turned away, swallowing hard, trying to keep his composure. But in his chest, something had begun to stir, and there would be no silencing it. The following days, the Whitmore mansion carried a new rhythm. Not loud or boisterous, just quiet changes only a watchful eye could notice. And David, though reluctant, noticed. He saw Laura pause in the library to straighten a crooked book and brush dust off its spine, details no one else cared for, not even the longtime staff. Yet she did it with a reverence as though tending dreams. He saw her at breakfast, coaxing Theo to eat oatmeal. When the boy resisted, she transformed the spoon into a spaceship, flying it through the air with playful sound effects until laughter carried each bite to his lips. He saw her on a Sunday morning, sunlight pouring through the curtains, sitting cross-legged on the carpet building Lego towers that scraped the ceiling. Her hair was a mess, her cheeks smudged with color from his crayons, but her smile was radiant, as bright as any child's. And each night he saw her beneath the glow of a small lamp, inventing stories that existed in no book. Stories of bears, pilots, and starlight tales so full of tenderness that David, simply listening at the doorway, felt warmth seep into his own chest. He realized then change did not come with grand gestures. It came with these small, ordinary moments. Piece by piece, Laura was stitching together what had once been broken. One evening, as he walked the corridor, David stopped short. Theo's laughter rippled from the living room, mingling with Laura's voice. He lifted his eyes to the portrait on the wall, his late wife, her painted gaze kind and smiling. His chest tightened. He whispered faintly, as if to her memory, "Do you see? He's laughing again." The man who had locked his heart since her death stood still, watching a stranger bring back the sound of joy. And in that moment, he felt pain, gratitude, and something else, something thawing. Close to midnight, the house was hushed. David returned from a long meeting. His tie loosened, his collar open. He intended to head straight to his study. But when he passed the living room, a warm glow drew his steps. Laura. She was curled up on the sofa, shoes off, still in her uniform. An open medical textbook lay across her lap, its pages marked with highlighter and scribbled notes. Her head had tipped to the side, golden hair falling loose, her breath even in sleep. David moved closer, eyes catching on the small details, the faint shadows under her eyes, the smudges of ink on her fingers, the thin callus from years of holding a pen. His chest stirred. She wasn't just the one who had restored his son's smile. She was a student fighting for a dream in medicine, giving her strength to study after long days, yet still coming here to care for Theo, to build stars out of scraps to read until she dropped. Quietly, David picked up a folded throw from the armrest and draped it over her shoulders. His hand hovered above her for a moment, aching to touch, before retreating, afraid the spell might break if he admitted it aloud. His voice came low, raw, meant only for himself. "You didn't just save him. You saved me too." The man, once proud of his steel heart, now stood undone, watching a girl who had simply fallen asleep. That night, for the first time in years, his sleep was different. No silence, no echoes of grief. Only the memory of his son's laughter and the peaceful breath of a young woman who had fallen asleep with a book in her lap. The next morning, sunlight bathed the garden in gold. Dew clung to the grass like scattered jewels. Normally, David would already be behind his desk, drowning in contracts. But today, a sound called him outside laughter. He followed the path and stopped. Laura sat on the lawn, hair glowing in the early light. Theo ran circles around her, a paper airplane soaring above his head. "Look, Miss Laura, it really flies," he shouted. Laura laughed, her voice soft as a breeze. "Yes, little pilot, straight into the sun." David froze, watching. The light wrapped them both in a living painting, so simple, so warm, it constricted his chest. Theo tumbled into Laura's arms, grinning wide, pressing his head against her shoulder. She held him close, whispering, "Careful now. If you fall, your airplane will be sad too." And David understood. His son felt safe there in a way that all his power, all his money had never managed since the night his wife was taken. His hand clenched, then slowly released. He knew this was more than gratitude. He wanted her here not only in the mansion, but in his life. For the first time in years, David dared to think of a word that had long been unbearable hope. He turned away, afraid to reveal too much. But in the rhythm of his heartbeat, he knew change had already begun, and there was no going back. That evening, the house was quiet again. Laura had just put Theo to bed and was gathering her bag to leave when her gaze fell on the piano in the corner of the living room. Dust lay across its surface. A sheet of music sat on the stand, edges yellowed and torn. Laura hesitated, then brushed the keys with her fingertips. A single note rang out, fragile, trembling, but clear. She sat down, pressing a few more, stumbling through a melody she half remembered from childhood. The music was imperfect, but it carried something real. At the staircase, David froze. His hand gripped the railing as memory surged his wife sitting at that very bench playing lullabies for their infant son. The room had once been full of music, laughter, love. Laura's playing faltered uneven, yet each note struck him deeper than polished performance ever could. It wasn't skill, it was heart. He walked closer. She looked up, startled, their eyes meeting in the reflection of the piano's glossy lid. But David's expression wasn't stern. His voice came rough, low. "Where did you learn that melody?" Laura bit her lip. "My mother used to hum it to me. When I saw the piano, I just wanted to try." David lowered himself beside her, his broad hand pressing a chord. The deep resonance blended with her hesitant notes, filling the room with a broken, tender harmony. Laura turned slightly, catching the look in his eyes. They weren't cold steel anymore, but fractured glass, fragile, vulnerable. The man who had sworn never to open his heart again now sat at a dusty piano, letting a stranger's clumsy song awaken pieces of him he thought long dead. When the music faded, silence settled, heavy and alive. Laura stood quickly, bowing her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it." David shook his head slowly, his gaze lingering on her hands. His voice was hoarse but steady. "No. It's been too long since this room remembered what life sounded like." Part 7. The Truth. Revealed. That morning, the sky over Westchester was heavy with gray clouds, pressing low as though warning of another storm. Laura had just finished tidying the living room. She was sitting cross-legged on the rug, with Theo helping him stack Lego bricks into a tower that wobbled dangerously. Then 3 sharp knocks thundered against the front door. Not the polite tap of a guest, not the casual rap of a delivery man. It echoed like a drumbeat of trouble. Laura froze. Her heart lurched. She cast a quick glance at Theo, then rose to open the door. Standing before her was a man in a gray suit, a clipboard clutched in hand, his face stern, his voice clipped. "Good morning. I'm the regional manager for Everclean Services. I'm here for a routine inspection. The assigned staff member here is Rachel Martinez." Correct. Laura's throat locked tight. The name Rachel struck like a blade cutting through the fragile disguise she had worn for weeks. Theo scampered over his small hand, tugging at the hem of her uniform. The man's frown deepened as he repeated the question. Before Laura could answer, Theo piped up innocent and clear as a bell. No, that's not Rachel. That's Miss Laura. In that instant, Laura's blood ran cold. The air seemed to vanish from the foyer, leaving her in a hollow vacuum. The manager's gaze sharpened, darting from his clipboard to the name tag pinned at her chest. His voice was harder now. Laura. There's no Laura in the company records. Who are you, and why are you in a client's home under someone else's name? Laura opened her mouth, but only fragments tumbled out. I only... And then another voice, deep steady like a tightened string. What's going on here, David? He descended the staircase every step, deliberate his presence commanding the room like carved stone. His eyes swept from Laura to the suited man, and silence closed in thick around them. The manager straightened his glasses. Mr. Whitmore, according to our files, this house was assigned to an employee named Rachel Martinez. But this woman, he pointed directly at Laura, is not Rachel. This is impersonation, a serious violation. Laura's pulse thundered in her ears. She tried to speak, her hands twisting together. I didn't mean... David's gaze pinned her colder than it had been in weeks. His voice came low, restrained, but sharp enough to cut. Is that true? Tears blurred her eyes. Her voice shook. My sister. She was injured. She couldn't come that night. I only meant to take one shift for her just once, and then... And then what? David's voice hardened. You kept coming back. You let my son grow attached. You let me believe in you, when it was all built on a lie. The words slammed into her like hammer blows. Laura's chest crumpled. No, it wasn't a lie. Not with Theo. Not with you. Every moment I've spent here, every smile, every story was real. But the manager cut in his tone cold. Mr. Whitmore, I recommend we terminate her placement immediately. Our company does not tolerate falsification of any kind. Laura's eyes darted desperately back to David, her last fragile hope, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. His voice, rough and unyielding, came like iron. Tell me your real name. Her lips trembled. She whispered, Laura. Laura Martinez. Rachel is my sister. The silence was suffocating. The ticking of the grand clock filled the air like a judge's gavel. David's face was unreadable stone. The warmth he had begun to show, the laughter at the dinner table, the softened glances, all shattered in an instant. His eyes, once touched with trust, now held only the shadows of betrayal. You stepped into my home under a false name, he said, voice hoarse with anger. You made me believe I could trust again. And all of it. Just theater. Laura shook her head, violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. No, I never meant to stay. But when Theo held on to me, when he smiled for the first time, I couldn't walk away. I only wanted him to feel safe again. David's jaw clenched, his voice bitter. Safe. You made a motherless child believe he'd found someone to hold on to. And now what, you'll tear it all down with the truth. The words struck deeper than knives. Laura collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I'm sorry. I swear I didn't do this for money, not for gain. I only wanted him to feel less alone. And then a sound. Small breaking. They turned. Theo stood on the staircase, clutching his stuffed elephant. It slipped from his arms, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. His wide gray eyes brimmed with confusion. Miss Laura. His voice shook. Daddy. Why are you saying she lied? David's lips parted, but no words came. Laura crawled forward, her tears spilling freely. Sweetheart, please. I never wanted to hurt you. Every story, every laugh, it was all real. Can you believe me? Theo's head shook, tears spilling as he turned and fled up the stairs, sobs echoing through the halls. The mansion fell silent, only this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of trust breaking apart. David's voice cracked like ice. "You should leave. Tonight." The door slammed behind her with a thundering echo. Rain poured down in sheets soaking her thin uniform. Laura stumbled into the storm clutching her small bag, tears mingling with the rain. In her mind, images replayed in cruel flashes. Theo's first laugh, David's softened gaze, the warmth of dinners shared. Now all erased by a single truth. Inside, David sat heavy on the stairs, head in his hands. He could still hear Laura's words trembling with sincerity. "I only wanted him to feel less alone." Upstairs, Theo's muffled sobs tore through the silence. David's chest burned his arms, aching to comfort his son, yet feeling powerless. He had promised to protect him from pain, and yet tonight he had delivered it with his own hands. Later in the library, the firelight flickered against David's face as he sat alone with a glass of untouched scotch. But the reports on his desk blurred. All he could see was Laura's tear-streaked face whispering, every moment was real. Soft footsteps on the stairs drew his gaze. Theo stood there, eyes red and swollen, dragging his elephant across the floor. "Daddy," his voice cracked. "Is Miss Laura coming back?" The question split David in two. He wanted to soothe, to promise, but he couldn't. The truth strangled him. Theo crumpled into his arms, sobbing. "She said she'd read me the stars every night. She said Mommy's light was still there. Now do I have no stars anymore?" David's own tears finally broke. He held his son tight, whispering hoarsely, "I'm sorry, buddy. I made a mistake. I let her go." And so father and son wept together on the staircase of a mansion that had been filled with warmth only days before. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the silence pressed heavier than any thunder. The Whitmore house had returned to its old state, cold hollow, without laughter. Only now, the absence was worse. Because once, for a brief and shining moment, they had known what it was to be a family. Part 8. Accusations and Farewell. The chandelier's golden light spilled across the marble floor, cold instead of warm. Laura stood trembling, her face streaked with tears. David towered opposite her shoulders, rigid gray eyes as hard and unyielding as stone. At the staircase, Theo clutched his stuffed elephant, wide-eyed, sensing with his young heart that something terrible was happening. David's voice cut through the silence, every word sharp as a blade. "You deceived us. Not only me, my son. And I will not allow that to happen in this house again." Laura stepped forward, pleading, her tears shining in the harsh light. "David, please. Don't say that in front of Theo. I never wanted to lie to him. Everything I did, every story, every smile was for him, so he could laugh, so he could feel safe." His jaw tightened, voice rising bitter as iron. "Safe? You call this safety? You walked in, under a false name, a false role. One day, when he discovers it was all built on lies, what wound could cut deeper? But he knows already." Laura's voice cracked, breaking. "He knows I'm Laura, not Rachel. And he still held me still, asked me to read him stories at night. Why can't you believe that those small moments were real?" David's hands, clenched veins straining. He turned his face away, but his words landed like hammers. "There is nothing left to believe." And then a cry shattered the air. Theo tumbled down the stairs, throwing himself at Laura's legs, arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. "Don't go. Miss Laura, don't go. I don't care about names. I just need you." His sobs echoed through the grand hall, raw and unrestrained. Laura sank to her knees, gathering him close, her tears soaking into his hair. Her heart tore apart at the sound of his voice. She pressed a trembling kiss to his forehead, whispering, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I love you so much. But sometimes, love isn't enough to stay." Piece by piece, she pried his tiny fingers from her dress, each touch breaking her heart anew. Theo wailed, clutching his elephant, watching helplessly as she turned toward the door. David stood frozen. Each sob from his son struck him like a mallet against his chest. But he forced himself to remain still, whispering inwardly, "It has to end. Better now than worse later." The heavy door shut behind Laura with a deep final thud like a verdict. Rain poured outside, swallowing her silhouette in its downpour. Her thin jacket clung to her frame, her steps stumbling on the slick stone path. Every drop of water on her cheeks burned like memory. Theo's first laugh with a paper plane in his hand, the glow of stars she had taped to his wall. David's fleeting smile at the dinner table. All of it cut away in a heartbeat. Inside, David faced the storm of his son's cries. "Daddy, why did you let her go? She promised me stars. I need her. I don't want her to leave." Theo's small fists pounded against his father's legs, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. David staggered under the blows, his voice breaking. "You don't understand, buddy. She lied. I can't. She didn't lie to me." Theo's scream split the silence. "She read to me every night. She made stars, so I wouldn't be scared. If that's a lie, then I want her lies forever." David's breath caught. The words carved straight through his armor. In Theo's eyes, he saw his own reflection, the same despair he had once felt when his wife was torn away. Outside, Laura vanished into the rain. Inside, David knelt, pulling his son close, holding the boy's trembling body, while his own chest cracked open with guilt. Later in the still hours past midnight, David sat alone in the library. The fire flickered low shadows twisting across his face. His untouched glass of scotch trembled in his hand as he stared at the wall where a handful of crooked paper stars still clung. He whispered into the emptiness, broken Laura, "I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong." Meanwhile, far away in Queens, Laura collapsed into her sister's arms, drenched and shivering. "He knows now," she sobbed. "David knows. Theo knows. It's over." Rachel held her tight eyes full of guilt. But Laura shook her head, her voice raw. "I don't regret it. Not for 1 second. Because for a little while, I saw Theo laugh. I saw that house live again. That's worth every tear." The next dawn broke pale and gray. In Queens, Laura walked toward the medical school with swollen eyes but unbroken steps, clutching her textbooks against her chest. She whispered to herself, "At least I can still help children. At least I can still keep my promise to someone, even if it isn't Theo." And in Westchester, David sat by his son's bed, watching the boy toss and turn, murmuring Laura's name, even in sleep. The man who had once believed money could shield him from pain now knew the truth. He had driven away the only light his house had found. He clenched his fists, resolve hardening through the grief. "Laura, I'll find you, whatever it takes." Part 9. A moment of regret. A week had passed since that stormy night of goodbyes. The Whitmore mansion had fallen silent once more. No child's laughter rang through the marble halls. No gentle bedtime stories drifted from the pale blue room. No new paper stars appeared on the wall. The old ones still clung there, crooked and fading, nothing more than relics of what had been lost. David awoke each morning hollow. He signed contracts, met with shareholders, shook hands with men who praised his decisiveness. But inside there was nothing. Each time his phone buzzed, hope sparked that it might be her, but it never was. That afternoon, leaving the office earlier than usual, he told his driver, "Take me to the medical school in Queens." The driver glanced back surprised, but said nothing. Soon the car slowed in front of a modest red brick building with a weathered sign, Student Clinic, Community Health Center. David didn't get out. He sat in the back seat staring through the rain-speckled window. And then he saw her. Laura. Her white coat hung a size too big hair, tied messily at the nape, loose strands falling across her forehead. She crouched in front of a little boy, no older than 6, his head wrapped in fresh bandages, eyes wide with fear. Laura took his tiny hand in both of hers, speaking softly, like a lullaby. Slowly, the child's shoulders relaxed. She handed him a piece of paper, a colored pencil, coaxing him into drawing his first shaky letters. Within minutes, he was smiling. David's chest clenched. This is who she is. Not a liar. Not a schemer. Not what he had accused her of being. She was light warmth, the kind of presence that could turn fear into laughter, darkness into peace. His mind echoed with his own words. From that night, you're just like the rest. You came here because you wanted something from me. The memory struck like a hammer. His throat burned with shame. He gripped the door handle, ready to step out, ready to fall to his knees if he had to, and whisper the 3 words he had spoken to so few in his life. I'm sorry. But his hand froze. The rain-soaked memory returned, Laura kneeling on the marble floor, tears streaming, begging every moment was real. And he had turned her away. David let go of the handle, leaning back, pressing his eyes shut. He didn't deserve to walk into that clinic. He had no right to disturb the fragile peace she was now giving to someone else. Through the glass, he watched as she folded a paper hat, placed it on the boy's head, then raised a stethoscope to her lips and blew a silly trumpet sound. The boy burst out laughing, an innocent ringing laugh. David's heart cracked. That laugh. He had heard it once before from Theo when Laura had first stepped into their lives. And now it was gone. The man who once commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will sat powerless in the back of a car, longing for a woman he had driven away. When the streetlights flickered on, David tore his gaze away and rasped to the driver, "Take me home." The car rolled forward, but he turned once more, just long enough to see her Laura in that shabby clinic, shining brighter than any chandelier in his mansion. That night, the Whitmore estate sank into a silence heavier than before. David sat in Theo's room long after the boy had fallen into restless sleep. The stars Laura had taped to the walls still clung there, crooked, peeling. He reached out, touched one rough, fragile, imperfect. His voice cracked as it slipped into the dark. "Laura, you left behind something I can never buy, never build. Light, peace, a home." He dropped his head into his hands. Tears burned his palms as the words from that night replayed, sharp and merciless. "You only came because you wanted something from me. For the first time in years, David wept without restraint. God, I was wrong. She never came to take. She came to give back what we lost, and I destroyed it. Theo stirred in his sleep, clutching his stuffed elephant. His lips moved, whispering Laura's name. The sound gutted David. He bent close, laying a trembling hand on his son's chest. I'm sorry, buddy, he choked. I was wrong. She was the best thing that ever happened to us. The proud, unyielding CEO broke down beside his son's bed, crying beneath the glow of crooked paper stars. And when dawn came, David made his choice. At Whitmore Enterprises, he tossed aside contracts and delayed million-dollar deals. Assistants panicked, but he silenced them with a single command: clear my schedule. Nothing matters more than this. His car turned toward Queens, toward the girl who had mended his son's broken smile, toward the only chance he had left. When he stepped into the clinic, Laura looked up. For an instant, the world froze. Her breath caught memory flooding back like a storm. You, she whispered, voice shaking. Why are you here? David stood still, stripped of power, his gray eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. I came to apologize. Her lips trembled, her hands balled at her sides. Apologize, you humiliated me. You threw me out in front of your son. You called me a liar. Do you think one word can erase that? David bowed his head, voice raw and low. No, I know it can't. But I've seen you here, Laura. I've seen the way you heal even strangers. The way you give peace I could never give my own child. I was wrong. I was blind. And I am begging you, let me make it right. The room fell silent. Around them, even the volunteers had stilled. Laura's heart thundered. His words cut deep, reopening wounds, yet a spark of warmth slipped through. Could she trust him again? Could she risk another heartbreak? Her eyes glistened as she whispered, almost too soft to hear. You came too late. David, too late. The air froze, teetering on the edge of something fragile, an ending, or perhaps a beginning. Part 10. The Birthday and the Promise. That morning, the Whitmore mansion looked nothing like its usual self. Gone was the cold, museum-like silence. The grand hall shimmered with blue and white balloons, silver ribbons dangling like tiny stars. A long table stood draped in white linen, and at the center sat a simple birthday cake topped with a paper star, just like the ones taped to Theo's bedroom wall. The boy darted around the room in his paper crown, slightly askew eyes, bright with a rare joy his father once feared he might never see again. Tugging at the strings of the balloons, he turned to David, his voice breathless with hope. Daddy, are you sure will Miss Laura really come? David knelt down, resting a steady hand on his son's shoulder, holding the boy's gaze. She'll come, buddy. Today will be the most special day. But deep inside, fear still churned. Laura had said yes to the invitation. But could she truly forgive? Beyond the iron gates, a yellow cab rolled to a stop. Laura stepped out, clutching a small gift wrapped in brown paper, her pulse racing. She looked up at the mansion, once the stage for her deepest joy and her deepest heartbreak. Today, she had returned. She couldn't decide if it was courage or weakness. Beside her, Rachel shifted on her crutches, whispering encouragement. You're not here for David. You're here for Theo. That little boy needs you. And Rachel's voice faltered, softening. And maybe you need him too. Laura nodded, inhaling deeply, before stepping through the gates that had once closed on her in the storm. The moment her footsteps echoed across the marble floor, Theo bolted forward, a blur of paper crown and tiny sneakers. He flung his arms around her waist, shouting with pure delight, "Miss Laura, you came, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't leave me." Her arms trembled as she folded him close, tears burning her eyes. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I promised, and I kept my promise." David stood a few steps back, silent, watching. His eyes brimmed with gratitude, with regret, and with the desperate hope of a man longing for one more chance. That afternoon, golden sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, painting the room in honeyed light. No extravagant party, no guests in designer gowns, just fruit plates, paper cups of soda, a simple cake with paper stars. And yet the room felt warmer than it had in years. David's hand rested gently on Theo's small shoulder as he said softly, "All right, buddy. Close your eyes. Make a wish." Theo clasped his hands, face lit with innocent joy, then blew out the candles. Smoke curled upward, wispy as fading starlight. Laughter and birthday songs filled the air. Laura stood nearby, her eyes misted watching the boy beam. He leaned close, whispering into her ear, "I wished you'd stay forever." Her heart clenched. She held him tighter, afraid to look up, because she knew David had heard, and he had. Every word struck like an arrow through the armor he'd built. He looked at his son, at Laura, the girl who had once been a stranger, now the heartbeat of their home. Then suddenly he spoke, his voice low, but carrying across the room. "Before we cut the cake, I need to say something." Rachel glanced at Laura, eyes wide. Laura froze her hands, trembling. David drew a deep breath, his voice unsteady in a way no boardroom had ever heard. "I thought, when I lost my wife, I lost everything. I shut the doors of this house. I shut my heart. But one stormy night, a girl walked in, and she brought laughter back to my son. And to me." He paused, his throat tight. "I doubted her. I pushed her away. I did the worst thing I could have done. But the truth is, she gave this house back its soul. And today, I can't stay silent any longer." The room fell utterly still. Balloons swayed gently overhead. Even Theo's wide eyes stared at his father in awe. David slipped a hand into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. No diamonds glittered inside, only a plain gold band, simple and honest. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "This isn't a grand proposal. It's a promise. A promise that I'll never let you walk out into the rain alone again. That I'll listen, I'll respect, and I'll build not just a house of stone, but a home built on love." Laura's breath caught. Memories stormed back, the heavy door closing in the rain, the cruel words, Theo's desperate cries. And also, the boy's first smile with a paper plane, the safety of his little arms around her neck. Tears spilled as she whispered, "David, I don't need diamonds. I only need the truth." And then a small ringing voice broke the silence. Theo's voice, bright as a bell. "Daddy, marry Miss Laura. Please make her my mom." The room erupted, gasps, muffled sobs from the staff. Rachel smiling through tears. David dropped to one knee, holding out the ring. "Will you give me the chance to make this our home?" Laura's hand shook as she reached for him. The ring slid onto her finger, plain and perfect, as if it had been waiting all along. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, I want this." Theo squealed, throwing his arms around both of them. "Now I have a mommy. I have a mommy." Laughter bubbled through tears. Laura knelt, hugging the boy, her voice breaking. "Sweetheart, I'm not leaving again. I promise." David knelt beside them, gathering both into his arms. For the first time in years, he felt warmth, real, undeniable warmth. No longer a cold mansion, no longer an empty life, a home. Theo giggled between them, his gray eyes sparkling. "See, we're just like the picture I drew me, Daddy and you. A family under the stars." David met Laura's tearful gaze, whispering, "He always knew. He saw this before we did." Laura pressed her forehead to his shoulder, tears falling, but for once, they were tears of peace. That night, long after the balloons sagged and the cake was gone, 3 figures sat close together under the glow of a single candle. Theo drifted to sleep against Laura's chest, clutching his stuffed elephant. David wrapped an arm around her, murmuring, "I let you walk out into the storm once. That was my greatest mistake. I swear I will never let that happen again." Laura raised her head, eyes wet, but smiling softly. "I don't need promises of grandeur. I only need the truth, that this is home." David squeezed her hand. "Then from this moment, this is our home." Outside, the night sky shimmered clear, no storm clouds in sight. Stars glimmered faintly through the glass, Orion standing watch. Laura smiled through her tears, whispering, "Look, Theo's mother is sending her light down to us." David drew her closer, his voice low, filled with reverence, "Not just from above, but from you." And for the first time, the Whitmore mansion was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It breathed it, laughed it, lived. All because one rainy night a girl kept a promise. Sometimes, family doesn't come from blood. It comes from sacrifice, kindness, and love. Wealth alone can't build happiness. Only trust and love can. Do you believe a single decision can change an entire life? Let us know in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more CEO love stories, where every tale is a second chance for the heart.